friends, Greg Koukl here. Thank you for being part of our show today. And I want to launch out actually by talking about two issues that dovetail really nicely together. By the way, I should give the phone number. I almost never do that. So maybe that's why I don't get as many calls as I might. And frankly, I don't think people are listening live because it's not live radio anymore like it used to be for so many years. But it turns out we do have live listeners on the stream and the live stream. And so when I've given the number, sometimes people have called in to chat with me, which is fine. Okay, normally people call in because they know I'm on the show from 4 until 6 p.m. on Tuesday evenings, LA time. All right. But you can, the number is 855-243-9975. 855-243-9975. If you're outside the U.S., you can dial 562. That's the local area code where I'm broadcasting from in the Long Beach area. That's 562-424-8229. And you call in. Amy will chat with you a little bit. If you pass her muster, she'll put you through to me, and we'll get to your calls, which is great. So just letting you know, I have a lot of open calls here, open mic calls rather, and you know how that works. They're recorded in advance. You guys call in, and I have those to work with as well. But I wanted to talk about two things. One is a piece that Alan Schliemann on our team has written. And the title is, Should You Accommodate an LGBT Person's Requests? Okay, so this has to do with what is sometimes construed as a kindness or an affirmation. Maybe not, that's too strong a word. It's a kindness or an act of love and consideration for a lifestyle that you may not agree with, but you still act in a way that is meant to show them kindness and love. At least that's the way they interpret it. And so this is why you act in a certain way. Now, Alan's going to he's going to weigh in on that. In fact, this piece is so good, I'm just going to read it to you. But our guys write things every single month, original pieces, and they go up on our website at str.org. And so you can stay informed on this. They're really good stuff, and you'll see this, the quality of this piece when I read it to you. But it's very good advice. It's advice, and now segueing over to this other issue that I wish Amy Grant had heeded, okay? Now, this may be old news in terms of this event, but in December, and I'm looking at an article written December 20th in Analysis, not even sure where that comes from, although my suspicion is it's left-leaning or sympathetic to leftist causes like homosexuality, LGBTQ, and all that, because of the way the piece is written, applauding and congratulating Amy Grant in light of her willingness to host a same-sex wedding at her own farm, okay? And I just want to read some pieces of this, and I'm not trying to beat up on Amy Grant. I'm just trying to bring some issues to light and ask you to think about these things. And keep in mind, what I'm reading is a characterization from a writer, all right? There'll be some citations and quotes here. You can take them at face value, but what I read, apparently what has taken place, troubles me deeply. And what troubles me is the crumbling, I don't want to say front now because that's too military, the crumbling convictions that reflect faithfulness to Jesus of Nazareth, who we claim to be following. Now, I give a talk regularly now as a result of my frustration with these kinds of things, and it's titled Faithfulness is Not Theologically Complicated. And I deal with a number of issues that it seems like Christians' commitment to are crumbling, even though these are not gray areas in Scripture, and homosexuality is one of them, or marriage is another, okay? When Jesus was asked about marriage, he said, "Have you not read?" That's the first words. that from the beginning, he made them male and female. He starts with gender when he explains God's purpose for marriage. If we are followers of Jesus, why is it that we do not take those words seriously? Well, I know why Amy Grant didn't, because she camps on another verse, and I'll share it with you, and you can decide whether you think the way she's applying it is appropriate. Okay? In any event, from the article, Amy Grant is hosting her niece's same-sex wedding on her farm, and Franklin Graham wants everyone to know he disapproves. So you can see already the writer is wagging his finger at Franklin. Of course, this should come as no surprise to Graham. In other words, Amy Grant's decision shouldn't be a surprise because of earlier things she said in a 2013 interview with the LGBTQ news outlet Pride Source. And nothing wrong with giving an interview. Grant said she knew by the time she was 18 that she had a gay fan base. Oh, okay, fine. Quote, so this is a quote from Amy Grant, even when I was discovering my own sexuality, those are her words. That just strikes me as an odd way of putting it, doesn't it? Do you see how it kind of, I don't know, it sounds to me like she's relativizing her own sexual experience. I discovered that now I'm putting words here, but I think this is implicit. Maybe not. I would never speak this way because it's too confusing. Even when I was discovering my own, even when I was realizing that in my own subjective sexual experience, I was migrating towards a heterosexual attraction. My own sexuality. Maybe that's not what she meant. Continuing, and meeting people that had a different experience. Now, that seems to nail it down. Different people have different experiences. Who's to say? That's kind of the way it seems to me. She says, I didn't categorize them, and I don't categorize right now. In other words, she doesn't say one experience is right and the other experience is wrong. Am I reading into this? Even when I was discovering my own sexuality and meeting people that had a different experience, I didn't categorize then, and I don't categorize right now. It makes me realize I don't have any idea of what it would feel like every moment of my life to go somewhere and feel judged. Well, the issue isn't how people feel. The issue is what God says is right and good. Now, if we're clear on that, then we have to ask what is the appropriate virtuous way to engage people who are living in such a way that we don't think is right or good according to God's plan. That's a different issue. And I think grace and kindness and congeniality and all of those things are appropriate because we don't expect non-Christians to live like Christians. But at the same time, we don't pretend or talk as if there is no moral significance between these. And that's, I think, the way she's talking here. Now, this is 2013. Okay, so let's fast forward here in the article that Grant gave an interview to the Washington Post. I guess it was not too long ago. I guess she received this month, Grant became the first contemporary Christian music artist recognized for a lifetime artistic achievement. All right. And just a month before the gala, so this is late last year, Grant gave an interview last year, this 10 years later than what I just read a moment ago. Grant gave an interview to the Washington Post where she discussed the upcoming wedding on her farm. A decade after her cautious interview, that's the one I just read a moment ago, in support of LGBTQ persons, okay, that should be qualified. You can support the person by being gracious and loving toward the person without affirming the behavior, right? But of course, that's not the way this person is reading it, and that's not actually the way I read it. Her comments 10 years prior, they were equivocal. Well, you know, some people have this experience, some have that experience, and I'm not judging. I'm not saying which is right and which is wrong. Okay. Continuing here now, a decade after her cautious interview in support of the LGBTQ person, she came out in full support of the thing evangelical Christians fear the most, same-sex marriage. Well, I don't fear same-sex marriage. Nobody I know fears it. Like we're same-sex marriage phobic. We think it's not right and there are problems with it, whatever. But I continue. The Post reported, quote, in recent years, this is the Post article that is Washington Post article that is being cited here. In recent years, she, Amy Grant, has voiced support for the LGBTQ community, where she has had a large fan base for decades. We already learned that. Now she talks about her and Gil's plans to host her niece's wedding at their farm, which is her family's first bride and bride nuptials. Grant recalls her reaction when she learned her niece had come out. Okay, now this is not in quotes, but it's in italics. I'm not sure exactly how to take it. This may be a characterization of something Grant says, but here's the italicized portion. Her reaction when she learned her niece had come out. What a gift to our whole family to just widen the experience of our whole family. What a gift. What if Amy Grant's parents stayed married but both have adulterous relationships with others that they announced publicly? Would Amy Grant say, what a gift to our whole family to widen the experience of our family? Just think about that, okay? And then she told the Post, honestly, from a faith perspective, I do always say, Jesus, you just narrowed it down to two things, love God and love each other. I mean, hey, that's pretty simple. Okay, there it is. Now there's her text. That's the text she's living by. Love God and love each other. Okay, this is really important. For Amy, she can do whatever she wants. That's her own choices. But I want you to understand that loving God and loving others has theological substance to it. It is not just a vague old bromide that's tossed out. Jesus said, why do you call me Lord, Lord, and you do not do the things that I say? Paul said, love, in 1 Corinthians 13, love does not rejoice in unrighteousness, but rejoices in the truth. Now, it is absolutely, unequivocally clear that sexual sin is unrighteous, all of it. Adultery, fornication, homosexuality, bestiality. That's the four that are proscribed by Scripture. All having sex with someone other than your heterosexual mate for life, wife or husband. So therefore, all of those things characterize unrighteousness according to God. That's straightforward. Why is that hard? If love does not rejoice in unrighteousness, then and a same-sex marriage reflects not just unrighteous unions, but a celebration of that. How can you celebrate unrighteousness by hosting that event at your home and call it love? Friends, this is not rocket science. This isn't high theology. Faithfulness is not theologically complicated. It is culturally complicated. It is difficult not to give in to the mob when the mob is all around you and throwing accolades at you all the time. It is difficult to say, no, here's where I draw the line. That line for her should have been drawn 10 years ago. Quote that I read from 10 years ago, she didn't draw it there. And like I said, my goal is not to harangue on Amy. I'm just using this as a contemporary example of something terribly wrong with Christians in the church that are celebrating in one fashion or another a worldly behavior that God said is terribly wrong. Now, Franklin Graham did respond. He said, yeah, we're to love God and love our neighbors. But if we love God, we're supposed to obey him. Jesus said, if you love me, keep my commandments, Graham notes. Yes. And God defines what sin is. Okay, I don't need to say any more about Amy Grant and about this abuse of the two great commandments, which have no moral substance, apparently, to Amy Grant and to a whole host of other Christians who are going along with it. All right? Love does not rejoice in unrighteousness, but rejoices in the truth. Now, with that predicate being laid, and it was a long one, I grant you that, I want to read Alan Schleman's short piece. When I say short, it's probably about 800 words. One page, both sides. Okay. And we all do these, like I said. Alan, Tim, John, Robbie, and me on alternating months because of solid ground. And this is on our website. Should you accommodate an LGBT person's request? So this is speaking directly to the kind of circumstance that Amy Grant faced and many other Christians are facing. And Alan's giving his wisdom. Here's what he says. Christians are routinely pressured to compromise their convictions. Sadly, it's other Christians who leverage a good faith principle to achieve an unfair end. I want to encourage you, though, if you're feeling pressured to accommodate a request from an LGBT person that violates your conscience, know that there's a line you do not have to cross. Now, of course, the problem here is, it's not with Alan's writing, it's a qualification. You're asked to cross a line that violates your conscience, and for many Christians, this is a line that doesn't violate their conscience. That's part of the problem I'm pointing to. He continues, one of the principles I've taught for nearly 2 decades is that we ought to maintain our relationship with friends and family who identify as LGBT. It's wrong to end a relationship or distance yourself from someone merely because they identify as LGBT, which would be true about any other sin. Just like Paul kind of intimates in 1 Corinthians 5, we don't judge people outside of the church. We don't separate ourselves from those people outside of the church. We'd have to go out of the world. And it's the world that we're meant to go into to bring light into the darkness. And Alan's just reflecting that same ethic here. Okay. After all, I've argued, he writes, relationships connect people like a bridge by which you communicate love, show compassion, or share the gospel. Therefore, I've argued, you should lean into your relationships with a friend or family member who identifies as LGBT. Lately, I'm seeing this principle misused, although not always intentionally. Christians are being told that they should never jeopardize their relationship with a friend or family member who identifies as LGBT. If they're asked to affirm or accommodate something that violates their conscience, they're told to go along anyway because they must, quote, maintain the relationship, close quote. That's a problem, Ellen writes. Yes, we should strive to maintain the relationship as best we can. There's a limit, though. If you must violate your conscience to accommodate another person's preferences or opposing values, then it's reasonable to decline. Actually, I think he could have said it more strongly. We're obliged to decline. Anyway, tell them, he writes, I'm sorry, I can't do that. I care about you, but you're asking me to deny my own values and convictions. Now, he says, might that cause your relationships to suffer or end? Possibly. Although that's not ideal, it's still okay. You can only go so far to accommodate other people's values or worldview. Many Christians, however, get guilted into violating their conscience because maintaining the relationship has been elevated to an unreasonably high priority. This forces them to reluctantly participate in social rituals, making them feel supportive of ideals they know are harmful. Okay, let that sink in. Virtually everybody that I'm reading to right now has either faced, is facing, or will face this circumstance. Many Christians, Alan continues, however, for example, he writes, Christians are pressured to use a transgender person's preferred pronouns, even though many are uncomfortable with doing so. It's said to be a benign yet simple act of love to practice what they call pronoun hospitality. The left just comes up with these clever phrases, don't they? Pronoun hospitality. Not pronoun bullying, which is what it amounts to, but pronoun hospitality. They're told that using the incorrect pronoun will damage their relationship, so they feel they're held hostage. Failure to go along with this request will destroy the relationship, so they must comply. Let's grant, for the sake of argument, Ellen says, that declining to use preferred pronouns would damage a relationship with a transgender friend or family member, though I know it doesn't always have that effect. I still think it's appropriate to decline to use preferred pronouns if you've reasons it's wrong, and doing so would violate your conscience, even though the relationship will suffer, and that's not ideal. Your decision is still appropriate. Now, as Rosaria, did I say it right? I got it right. Rosaria Butterfield has recently posted a mea culpa, and Amy's going to probably, put it on the show notes here, because coming out of a gay lifestyle herself, becoming a very committed Christian, and writing about these things quite candidly, she used preferred pronouns for a while, and I think even wrote in favor of it, and then had a change of heart about it as she reflected on the moral consequences of doing that. Now she says, absolutely not. That is sin before God. That's her view. And I just encourage you to read that, because she argues well regarding that issue. And, I think those who may not be sure about the propriety of not using preferred pronouns would do well to consider her thinking, her argument. But I continue. Here's why he says that the decision, even though it damages a relationship, your decision not to use preferred pronouns is still appropriate. You shouldn't make maintaining the relationship the highest goal. It is important, and we should strive to nurture healthy, lasting relationships as best we can. And he cites here Romans 12 and verse 18. That pursuit, though, should not trump your fidelity to other important aspects of your life. Fidelity to biblical values. That's his line. Mine is faithfulness is not theologically complicated. All right? Fidelity also, he writes, to reality, and fidelity to what you think is right. It's unhealthy to deny those components of your life just so a relationship doesn't suffer. So, Alan's point, do the right thing before God. If the relationship suffers, and it may not, well, that's where you draw the line, because the relationship is not more important than faithfulness to God. All right. Almost done here. It's one thing to deny your preference for the sake of others. You may not like mushrooms, but you go along with your friend's insistence on putting them on a pizza. You might not like science fiction films or hiking in the desert, but these are preferences that don't have a moral quality to them. It's an entirely different thing to deny your own values and convictions. Even if you compromise your convictions and use your friend's preferred pronouns, will that be enough? This is a pragmatic concern now. Is it sufficient to practice pronoun hospitality even when you don't believe they're the opposite sex? Or would a transgender friend or family member also demand your sincerity? Okay, so it's one thing to just say it and not believe it. But wait a minute, is that going to satisfy them? Maybe they aren't happy if you just say it. You have to believe it. Alan says if you accommodate that, then what's next? When will they be satisfied with you? As long as you don't accept transgender ideology wholesale, you will always be at odds with their values and worldview. You can never do enough. Therefore, what's the point of appeasing them? All it does is compromise your own convictions to uphold a false ideology you know is dangerous and damaging to them and others. Besides, pronoun hospitality is anything but hospitable. Why? It's insincere. When you use preferred pronouns, you're saying something with your words, that they're a different sex, that you don't believe within your heart. Would they genuinely want that from you? It's patronizing. If the roles were reversed, I would never expect a non-Christian friend to be insincere simply to appease me. If I invited them to my child's baptism, but they were opposed to Christianity, I wouldn't expect them to pay lip service to a theological truth they don't believe. I wouldn't demand they attend the ceremony against their convictions, or else I'd end our relationship. No, there's no moral principle that elevates relationships to a point where they trump your deeply held beliefs. Therefore, there's no duty to accommodate every request made by a friend or a family member who identifies as LGBT. The same would be true of relationships with non-LGBT people. Do your best to love your friends and family and honor those relationships as best you can. Remember, though, that fidelity to God and your convictions is also important. Well done, Alan. Available at str.org. And back to Amy just for a moment. The two great commandments are love God and love your neighbor. But love God is the first one. You do not love your neighbor at the expense of loving God through obedience to Him and reflecting His truth clearly to the world. If you do, you are no longer a light to the world. You have put a lampshade on. You are blocking the light. Speak the truth with love, full of grace and truth. That's Jesus, John chapter 1. And that's Alan. That's what Alan's saying. He has always held this, full of grace and truth. We don't compromise truth, though we live out grace to the people to whom we speak the truth without compromising, especially a truth that's so critically important and is destroying people's, and the not the truth, but the denial of the truth is destroying people's lives. All right, let's take a break, and then we'll get to your calls here on Stand to Reason. All right, guys, some things happening here coming up this week. I've mentioned them in the past. I want to just let you know, because when our team is out and about, I want you to know where they're going to be at. You can show up. Robbie Lashua is going to be at the Imperial Valley Apologetics Conference in El Centro. That would be south of San Diego, and it's hard to get too far south without getting into Mexico. But El Centro is like 5 miles from the border, but this is where the event's going to be, Southern California, and Robbie's going to be part of that event. That's on Saturday, May 20, okay, in like 2 weeks or so. And Tim Barnett on the same day, Saturday, May 20, will be in Lubbock, Texas at the Unapologetic Conference there. Amy Hall is going to be doing a workshop on scripture memorization, the Women in Apologetics Conference. That's WIA, is that right? Is that what they call it? Women in Apologetics Conference. Do they like check IDs so no guys can come, or how does that work? No, guys show up. Okay, that's good. Single guys? And just checking. Anyway, June 10th. It's all women speakers, but guys can come, Amy just told me. June 9 and 10 in Anaheim. Okay, and that would 10th is my birthday, 73 on that date. And the theme of the conference is orthodoxy. And you can learn more at womeninapologetics.com/2023 WIACONF, like Women in Apologetics Conference. You can get all this information, by the way, at str.org/events, where we're all at. And I'm going to be rusticating a little bit and relaxing and hopefully spending some time in the boat. You know how that's the jerk on one end of the rod that's waiting for a jerk on the other end of the rod. Yeah, that's what I'll be doing with my brother for a bit, and it's long overdue. So anyway, those are the things coming up. Just to let you know also that applications are still open right now for Stand to Reason Outpost directors. We actually have 75 outposts now. We started with the first ones in September. We got last year, and we got 75 now. Robbie Lashua is doing just a knockdown, bang-up job. I guess knockdown, bang-up doesn't sound like a good thing, but I mean it in the most Christian way possible. He's doing great. And looking for more outpost directors, but remember, STR outposts are local communities of Christians that are seeking answers to hard questions. They're kindred spirits gathering together in the local church to encourage each other and also be a resource to others in the local church. And they each have directors, so we need somebody to lead the process. We provide stand to reason materials and kind of a protocol for you to follow. It's all there, and if you want information on that, you can go to str.org/outposts. Okay, and then you can get all the skinny there. All right, with that done, let's go to our first caller in Michigan. His name is Tanner. Hello, Tanner.
Hi, Greg. How are you?
Oh, wait a minute. I think I pushed the wrong button. Nevertheless, okay, I got you. Was I supposed to? I'm looking at Amy. I'm seeing the wrong thing here. Okay, so go ahead, Tanner. You're on board. Thank you for calling.
All right, Greg. So here's my question. Something I've been pondering over for quite a while. If God's omnipresent, he's aware of, the past, the future, and if he was aware of all the people who would suffer, all the children who would starve, pre-creation,
right,
and he still decided to go ahead and create, does that make him an evil God, or does that make him responsible for all the suffering?
Well, there are two questions there. Is he responsible for all the suffering? And is he an evil God? Okay. Because from time immemorial, God always knew what would be the consequence of his action. Okay. Now, I talk about this in the story of reality. And this does raise the question, the general question of evil in the world. How can a good God allow evil in the world? Your particular question is just a variation of that, all right?
Right.
And does that not make God culpable? Okay. So here's the twist. The twist is, let me back up and just give an illustration. Do you have children?
I don't.
Oh, okay. I do. Okay. So I'll use me as an example. I have kids. Now they're 18 and 14, but when they were young, I took them to the doctor, so they got shots. My kids didn't like shots. What kid does? Here comes the needle, boink, like that. We don't like that. Daddy, why are you doing this evil thing to me? Okay, causing me this pain. And the reason I am allowing them to feel pain is because I have a purpose in mind for it, and the purpose represents a greater good than the pain they're suffering. Okay? So the principle here is that God could allow something that he knows is going to happen that in a limited sense is evil and in itself is evil if there is a greater good that he sees will come out of it. Okay? If there is a greater good that comes out of it, or the action diminishes some other evil in a way that justifies this particular instance, then God's not evil for doing it. So now this is just formal categories that I'm offering, because a lot of times people are going to say, well, then tell me what the greater good is. And the answer is I don't know entirely. I can't tell you the greater good that is going to come out of any instance of evil that happens to any individual. And the reason I can't tell you that is because I'm not God and I don't know what his purposes are. Sometimes the good might happen way down the line, the greater good. Now, I do have some illustrations, and many times, even in our own lives, especially as Christians, we can see this taking place. But the illustration is a historical one. It's about Quantos. Do you know who Quanto is?
I don't.
Well, Quanto was a Native American. Did I get it right? Oh, Squanto. Quanto was Squanto's mathematically inclined brother. That's why they call him Quanto. Okay. It's Squanto. Thank you, Amy. She's looking at me with a blank look. Amy, you don't know who Quanto is? No, it's not Quanto. It's Squanto. Okay, Squanto. Okay. Squanto was a Native American during the time of the Mayflower complex, the Pilgrims landing, and et cetera, et cetera. But what had happened with Squanto is Squanto had been kidnapped by some other European Spaniards, I think, and they took him back to Spain. Okay, he ended up being adopted by some Franciscan monks or something like that, and then he ended up becoming a Christian, and then they took him to England as a way to try to get him back to his homeland, and so he learned English. All right. Now, as it turned out, no, those are all terrible things. The guy gets kidnapped, then he's taken as a slave to another country, leaves his whole family. It turns out, though, that his whole tribe that he left ended up dying, every single person, due to a plague. They were gone. Squanto was the only one who survived because he wasn't there when they got the plague. When he's repatriated to his area, now he's been attached to another tribe around the time that the Mayflower lands. And the Europeans don't know how to farm. They don't know how to take care of things. They're dying. And this Native American walks into their camp and greets them in English, and then is able to instruct them in in what they need to survive that first winter and get crops and whatever. And he tells them all about these things, right? Okay, so here's an instance where the bad thing that happened is he got kidnapped. But the result of him being kidnapped is he didn't die of the plague. But even better, when he's returned after this terrible experience of being kidnapped, but he then becomes a Christian, and then he learns English. When he is repatriated, he's able to help the American settlers survive. So you can see in the sovereignty of God, allowing a bad thing in order to accomplish a greater good. Do you see the equation there?
I do.
Okay. And now that's
Go
an
ahead, Greg.
historical example. The only other thing I was going to say is any Christian who has walked very long with God will be able to look back in their life and see things that happened that were not good. They were painful, they were difficult, they were awful, they were tragic, and it befuddled them at the time. But now, with historical perspective, they can see how God used that for some greater good in their lives. And I even know, for example, of a woman who lost her husband tragically in an accident as a Christian. And it was obviously, a miserable experience to her. But she says now, God used this to do such a great thing in my life. Though I love my husband and I miss him, I am better off now than I was then. I wouldn't want it to happen again, but I can see that what the good that God did that justified the decision that he made. Okay. So that's, every Christian has a testimony like that, maybe not to that extreme. And so what this is meant to show is that God can allow a bad thing and it's justifiable if he has a morally sufficient reason to do it. That is, maybe some greater good is going to come out of it. And so looking in eternity now, God knew when he created man that all these bad things were going to happen and human beings were going to be judged for the badness that he knew would happen. But he also saw something else. He saw a greater good that he would accomplish as a result. And that greater good is greater than the bad that he knew was going to happen. And therefore, God is not the author of the evil that people chose to do, and he is not guilty of evil for allowing them to choose the evil because he made a greater good out of that.
So, Greg, the thing that sticks with me that maybe it doesn't matter, but to me it feels like it does. I agree with everything you said, and I've done a bunch of research and gone through a bunch of the stuff you just said. But it comes down to pre and post creation. I mean, everything you just said applies to us, and I feel like the logic we've applied to explaining the evil in our lives post creation. But if God had the foreknowledge of all the suffering and all the evil pre-creation, why didn't he just not create? That's kind of where I'm at. And again, maybe that doesn't matter. Maybe the argument um, takes care of both sides of that, but I don't know.
Well, the date or the event of creation is not relevant to an omniscient being. It always was the case that God knew everything that was going to take place. He didn't learn about the fall of man after he created, and then he goes, "Oh, now what?" He knew that was
Right.
going to happen, and you pointed that out earlier. He's omniscient. Foreknowledge, sometimes people use that as omniscience, but it's also in Scripture used as a synonym for election. So that's why I don't use that word, because it can be confusing. So he certainly, in his omniscience, knew this was all going to happen, and probably the simplest way that I could put it is he also knew that it would be worth the risk. It's a way of putting it. Now, it was no risk to God because he knew the good that would eventuate from it, just as he knew the bad that would be the result of his creation. And since the good, let me put it this way, if the good is greater than the bad, then God's decision to create was morally justified. And all we have to do is show, in this case, a possibility. We don't have to show, well, what are all the good things? I don't know. But the claim is, if God knew the bad was going to happen, then he is evil and morally responsible for the bad that happened. And my point is, not necessarily so. If there is, and we know from our own experience, just like with kids, we are willing to suffer a short-term evil for a long-term good. Think of D-Day, June 6, 1944. There were 30,000 civilians that died on the D-Day invasion. 30,000 civilians that died as a result of the D-Day invasion. Okay? That's a lot of innocent people that died. How could that be justified? Because the greater good was freeing all of Europe, which eventually happened. And so the short-term bad is justified because of the greater good, at least was in view with the invasion. Fortunately, it succeeded. In God's case, though, it's not a guess. He knows. And as long as that equation is a plausible equation, given God's omniscience about all aspects of the future, then God is not necessarily morally culpable for creating a world that would eventually go bad in some ways.
That makes sense.
It's not always satisfying when the evil hits you personally, or any of us personally. I understand that. I get it. But I think that's what I described is the appropriate way of kind of looking at the whole thing. And I've mentioned this before. Maybe I said it last hour. I don't know. But there's a phrase I use a lot for myself before the Lord. And the phrase is, Lord, you know. Lord, you know. I said it yesterday as I'm walking to my shop. I was building a fishing pole in my shop. My comment had nothing to do with my fishing pole, but it had something I was pondering that had befallen me that I was not happy with. Now what? Well, I could shake my fist at God. I could do that. That's not going to help anybody. Or I could acknowledge the sovereignty of God in my circumstance. Lord, you know. I don't know, but you do. And we know, I'll tell you what we do know, that God causes all things to work together for good for those who love him and are called according to his purpose. For those whom he foreknew, there's your foreknowledge word applied to election. Those whom he foreknew, the people he foreknew, not the choices he foreknew. Those whom he foreknew, he predestined to become conformed to the image of his Son. Okay? So I know that no matter what befalls me as an individual, and so the principle has broader application to your concern, but for me as an individual, boy, I don't get it, but I know that God has promised something. I don't see all the whole picture, but I could say, okay, I just letting this go, Lord. I'm entrusting it to you. You know, Lord. You know. And that helps me to deal with it. And so it does have application in a broad sense to this larger, in a sense, philosophical or theological conundrum, the problem of evil, etc. But it has very practical application to our personal lives, because in the most difficult things we face, we can still say, okay, Lord, you know, You're a good God. You know. I don't know, but you do. And that's what I do. That helps me. That help you, Tanner?
That does. That does. Thank you, Greg.
All right. All the best to you, brother.
Hey, you got time for one more question, real quick?
I got another caller up, but I'm just looking at. I got. Hold on, just a minute. Well, I just want to use up. I don't want to give Brandon the short shrift. So what? Yeah, but I got 10 more minutes right now. I can take. Okay, here's what I'm going to do. Brandon, you're on, and I should have pushed your button first, but I didn't. But I'll take you right at the top of next hour, and I'll take the next 10 minutes and finish up with you, Tanner, and then I get you both in. Okay, so go ahead, Tanner. Your other question.
Okay. With what you were just talking about earlier in the podcast about the pronouns. So I'm a school teacher, and we're being told that we have to use pronouns, but something I refuse to do. What do you say to a school teacher in that situation? How do I handle that? How do I go up against my administration in that?
Yes. Okay, so I have some suggestions, but it's difficult to apply. And the reason it's difficult to apply is because there may be a price for saying no. There shouldn't be a price, but now they are exacting a price, and you have to decide what you're going to do, okay? Now, I actually have here a piece that Amy wrote that reflects advice that I gave to someone else who raised the same question, and they applied it in their life, wrote a piece to his employers, because this wasn't a school district, but it was employers, so it's not government, it's private, but the same issue, okay? And what I suggest, the way I encourage people is to ask, why is this required? Why am I required to violate my conscience on this issue? Or maybe ask the question, do you think people should live authentic lives consistent with it? Now, of course, that's what they think, which is why they want to promote transgenderism, because that's authentic to the transgender person. Great. Can I be authentic too? Am I allowed to be authentic to my own convictions? All right. Do you want me to lie? These are questions. I'm just giving it to you real quickly here, the kinds of things I would say. If I don't believe in this, then you're asking me to go against my strongly held convictions. Why are you asking me to do that? Why are you forcing your politics on me? Now, they're going to say, well, it's because it's being nice. Well, wait a minute. It's not being nice to me, because you're threatening me now if I don't do what you say. You can be nice to the transgendered person. You do not you don't talk to a transgendered person with pronouns. You don't say, hey him, hey her. You're referring to the transgendered person in the third person when you use pronouns. You're talking to somebody else about them. Okay? You can do a workaround and just always use their first name or their last name if you want to without using the pronouns. But this is a political move, and it's all politics, and it's bullying. Okay? Now, what I'm going to do is read to you what this person wrote to their employers. He said, I recently spoke to Stand to Reason supporter who received this is Amy's writing, but referring to the practical application, who received a company-wide email saying leaders were expected to display their pronouns. So this is a little different, but it's the same category. After considering the cost and thinking carefully through this response, this is what he told his employer. So now this is what the person in your circumstance wrote to his employers. I appreciate the goal of mutual respect and creating a welcoming environment for everyone. My desire is to be respectful of everyone. The expectation to display my pronouns, and in your case, Tanner, you can say the expectation to use pronouns contrary to my own personal convictions, okay? The expectation to display my pronouns asks me to accept a premise I cannot accept, namely that my pronouns could be different than he, him, because he's a male. He writes, it's an ontological claim about the nature of reality. You can leave the ontological part out and just speak regular English, but it's a claim about reality. And I hold a different view. I'm not asking those that are transgender to accept my view of reality, but I'm being asked to accept theirs. And so this is part of the strategy I suggest for you, Tanner. I am not trying to change any other person's view about anything. I'm not asking the administrators to change their view. I'm not asking a transgender to change their view. All I'm asking is to be allowed to have my own view. That's what you're asking. Of course, they don't want to do that. They want to bully you. Okay,
Right.
the last thing he puts is, I can live, this is the piece that this man wrote to his boss, I can live and work with respect toward anyone with different beliefs than my own, including my transgender coworkers. Can I be respected in my beliefs that differ on the nature of gender and identity while affirming the dignity of every person? That is a key question. Can I be respected? I would show the dignity and respect to everybody. But can I be respected? Now, what they're going to do, and this is what's happening here, is they are defining dignity and respect as affirming the other belief. But now you're affirming a belief you don't hold. And just like Ellen said in the piece that he wrote, is that going to make you happy for me to lie? Do you want me to lie to people? Because I'd be affirming a belief I don't hold. Now, apparently this received a good response. Amy, is this posted? Oh, she'll tell me later. She's on the phone. She writes, I thought this was such a good response, hitting key points. 1, the request is not neutral. 2, the request is contrary to his beliefs. And 3, mutual respect requires neither party be forced to affirm something they don't affirm. And 4, affirming the dignity of every human being regardless of their beliefs on this topic, and will treat all with respect. Those are the 4 things that are resident in this response that I think are really, really important. Okay? So my encouragement is that you, as you tell your whoever your administrators and your bosses are, and ask them, why are you being forced? And I don't know what the punishment will be. You lose your job? Okay, you want me to be nice to them by using their preferred pronouns, and if I don't, you're going to fire me? Really? So, I mean, do you see how unbalanced this is? This is why people have to say no, because these are bullies, and bullies don't stop until you, and metaphorically speaking here, knock them down. That's the only way to stop a bully. And now, once again, advice is cheap. I can tell you my view. It doesn't cost me. It costs you. But I think this piece that Amy wrote, is this online, Amy? Okay, this piece that I just cited will be online on Wednesday. That's tomorrow. And when this piece comes out, this podcast comes out. And so you can look at her piece and then maybe use that to remind you of our conversation and look at your circumstances, see how you can adapt that to those circumstances. But this is politics. That's all it is. And it's bullying. They are demanding that you act like their political views are true, even if you don't believe them. And it has nothing to do with being nice, because they're not being nice to you. They're going to punish you and other people a lot worse than they think the transgender person is being punished when somebody in a third person doesn't refer to them with the proper genders. I mean, it's so unbalanced, okay? Why are they doing this? Because they're enforcing a narrative. And the narrative is a specific view of reality that is false. And that's what you're contending for. So if you have this conversation, Tanner, I suggest you be gracious and nice, point out what's going on here, and hold the line on what's true. Because what's the next thing? As Alan said, what are they going to demand next? What other thing are you going to force me to affirm in order to keep my job and make a living? You know, and they will not stop here, because this itself is a big step off of other things. Every time it's another step until they can totally control what everybody says according to their narrative. All right. There's my music. So I'm out now, Tanner. Okay. Yes. Yeah. You're so welcome. And I'm glad that I had an opportunity to speak to this issue. And read Amy's piece coming out tomorrow at str.org. And this wonderful response this other person sent to his own employer, and with good result, from what I understand. So you never know when God's going to honor your willingness to stand tall and true to the truth. Greg Koukl here for Stand to Reason. Give him heaven, friends. Bye-bye now.